Hi, Tim. Hi, everybody.
So, all right. Well, welcome to another installment of Housing Policy Made Simple here. This is a series of, we don't like to call them workshops because we used to call them office hours. You know, this is an opportunity for advocates to come together and do a deeper dive on some housing policy. And this is a partnership of the Orange County Housing Advocacy Collaborative, which consists of Orange County United Way under the United End Homelessness Housing Champions Advocacy Network, and then People for Housing OC, which is Elizabeth Hansburg, and then our wonderful Kennedy Commission, which is Cesar Covarrubias. And so you're going to hear a lot from them in just a second, but let me, for some of you who may be joining us who are new to this, I know some of you are veterans because I see you at these all the time. Let me kind of explain sort of what we're doing here. We do an advocacy 101 where we kind of just introduce people to the topic of housing advocacy, but we don't do a deep dive in policy there because we don't want to scare people away, right? I mean, this stuff can get a little mind numbing, and we don't want people in their first dipping their toe in the water to be inundated with a deep policy dive. And there are a lot of acronyms and things like that. But what we started seeing happening was the same people coming back multiple times to Advocacy 101 because they were just thirsty to get connected to people and to gain more knowledge. So we decided, you know what, why don't we start taking a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these issues? And that's how we started these Housing Policy Made Simple sessions. So the way these go, there's going to be no PowerPoint unless Elizabeth and Cesar put any slides up. There's no real formal presentation, although Elizabeth and Cesar, I'm going to ask them to kick off, and we have a couple of questions, and they're going to talk a little bit about annual progress reports for housing elements, just to kind of prime the pump. But we want to spend most of the time responding to your questions today and interacting with you and hearing your thoughts on it. So it may not be just a straight up Q&A session where you're asking Elizabeth and Cesar, questions. It might be that you're also sharing some of your expertise with us. Some of you are fairly seasoned housing advocates, and so maybe you have some perspectives on this as well. So as you can tell, we try to keep this a much more informal kind of a gathering than some of the other trainings that we do. And so before we move on, though, let me also ask, housekeeping wise, please everybody keep your microphone on mute until I ask you to unmute, and later I will, so that we can have some dialogue and discussion, but that will cut down on the background noise. And then the other thing I want to make sure that you all have on your calendar is we have coming up on July 12th, our next Housing Policy Made Simple is a very, very special one. I'm really, really excited about it. Hopefully all of you have RSVP'd. If you haven't, you need to come to it, and you need to spread it among your networks. I want to have 100 people there, if not more. If you're not familiar with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, you should be. Their wonderful president CEO is Diane Yentel. Diane is one of the top-notch housing advocates in the country, just absolutely amazing, the work that she does and the national coalition does. And she has agreed to come and do one of these sessions on federal housing policy. So what's the role of federal government? How can advocates ensure that you are bringing the federal resources here locally, that your local leaders are using those federal resources to affect the best possible outcomes and change that we possibly can? You're not going to want to miss that. That is going to be a treasure trove of information for you. And so I've heard her speak before too, and she really does make that stuff simpler. Like, she really has a gift to kind of make it understandable and accessible. So mark your calendars for July 12th, and please spread the word about that. And then the last thing I will say, that if you know people who have not attended an Advocacy 101, please always go to the United End Homelessness website. And maybe Michael, if you can put that in a link to that in the chat. All of the workshops and trainings are there. And then also Cesar and Elizabeth, they are always doing workshops, trainings, community chats, things like that as well. So maybe you can put your website in there as well. Please check those, sign up for the newsletters on all of those so that you're just getting that in your inbox all the time. we really want to start adding to our ranks. And so one of the best entrees to doing that is Advocacy 101. Just send them to that. We'll take all the fear out of it. We'll do some myth busting, and we'll get them all excited about joining and locking arms with all of us. So with all that being said, that's our house cleaning portion of it. It is my pleasure to have with us tonight our two resident experts, Elizabeth Hansburg from People for Housing and Cesar Covarrubias from the Kennedy Commission. And our topic tonight are annual progress reports for the housing element. Now, that may not sound super exciting, right? But it's really, really important that we all kind of understand what these are. I'm not going to talk a whole lot. I'm going to just facilitate mostly the Q&A later, and I'm going to turn this session almost completely over to Elizabeth and Cesar, and they're going to start with just a quick overview of what these annual progress reports are, what they're used for, when they must be completed, all of that kind of stuff as we move into the sixth cycle. Let me though ask before we start, and maybe just hit the raise your hand icon in response to this so I can understand. Is there anybody here who really doesn't understand what housing elements are? And don't be shy. If you don't, I'd rather know so that I can ask, Cesar does a great little just quick blurb on what they are, if that would be helpful for everybody, just to get people up to speed before we start talking about the annual progress reports. So even if we have one, so Cesar, maybe when we start, if you could just give a quick, this is what housing elements are and why they're important, so that people understand the context of these annual progress reports in relation to the housing elements. And then we're going to talk about pivot and talk about how advocates can get more engaged with the APR process here in this cycle. So that's what we're going to cover tonight. So who would like to kick us off? Cesar, you maybe want to kick us off with what is a housing element, and then maybe Elizabeth, we'll go to you and we'll start talking about the annual progress reports.
Yeah, and I'm gonna probably do the first part really quickly and then switch over to my phone as I have to travel. But starting off, just Cesar Covarrubias with the Kennedy Commission. So we do advocacy and policy work to increase affordable housing opportunities here in Orange County. And as Tim mentioned, one of the most useful tools in planning, which is a very complicated area that a lot of people don't want to endeavor into, planning, land use, is recognizing that there's a role for everybody in this process, right? To understand how planning impacts housing and impacts development in your city. So housing elements are essentially a housing tool, that's a housing plan for 8 years, where the city is telling you where development potentially could happen in their city in terms of sites. Also, we'll identify policies, programs that would encourage affordable housing development and also market rate development. So it's for housing at all income segments. So there has to be policies and programs that promote housing at all income segments. Here at the Kennedy Commission, we tend to focus more on the extremely low and very low. And you'll see in a minute, as part of our presentation, why that's important, because by and large, market tends to contribute a lot of the housing towards the market rate housing and the moderate housing to some extent. So any other questions before we proceed? And if you don't mind, Tim and Elizabeth, can I go first?
Sure. Yeah. And also, if you have questions, don't feel like you got to wait until the end. Go into the chat and write them in there, and I will maybe stop at different intervals and chuck them into the conversation as we go forward. So please, at any time, go into the chat and write a question that you might have.
Great, thank you. So starting off our presentation, I put 2 links in the chat. One of them is to the Acd APR data dashboard. The other one is also to the Kennedy Commission webpage that has files that have compressed a lot of the information from the cities reporting to the state. So starting off, what are APRs, or annual progress reports? So the annual progress report is a tool that was implemented probably about 5 years ago as part of this 5th cycle of the housing element, where cities have the obligation to report to the state their progress on all the items in their housing element. One being programs, the other one being production at the different income levels, and they have to have data and information in there as to what they're doing to track their timeline on implementing what they committed to do in their housing plan. So that's what a progress report is. It essentially will report from the local government to the state what production has happened at the different income categories, and also what policies and programs that you committed to have been implemented, or what progress has happened towards that. So I wanted to just quickly share with you the Acd dashboard, which is first link that I sent over, and you can see it here on the webpage. It's a pretty comprehensive document that has a lot of information, but we'll read the information here on the main page as to how to look at this data source. And they do have different screens that will allow you to go through it and then be able to narrow it down to your cities. So here's kind of, on the bottom, you'll see a toggle there, page 2, 1, 2, and 3. So page 2 just gives you an overview of all development at the level of the state, right? It's a comprehensive summary of everything that's been developed in the state to this state. And usually these planning periods that are being tracked are 8-year planning periods. So right now we are in what's called the 6th cycle. The 5th cycle just finished. That was it was 2022, I believe, to 2021. Pardon me, that's all right. It was 2014 to 2021. And so cities have to report every April what progress they have for their prior years. So this year, we're getting the final report for 2021 in April. So we just got those. Most cities have already submitted. Some cities have not. So those we need to track and go through. So here's the tool also in terms of just giving you more data and information. And go to the left on this Housing Element Implementation APR dashboard. You can click on your county. And once you click on the county, it gives you county data for Orange County. What's been developed, what's the progress. And we see that there is significant development in terms of entitlements and permits. This lets you know what's been moving forth, what type of product, single family, multifamily. Then the next screen will give you more information and detail, like what type of construction has happened and what levels of construction are being addressed in their development. So you'll see on top, there's a legend here that gives you very low. Low is blue and the light teal, and then moderate being orange, and then the yellow being above moderate. So we see that Orange County has a significant development on the above moderate, which is the yellow, but not much so on the very low and moderate. So about three-fourths of development in the county is market rate, and the remainder is affordable at moderate, low, very low. And here to the left, will give you per city what your city looks like. So if you look at Laguna Hills, quite a bit of development, a lot of it being above moderate. Some cities have a blue, like Anaheim, and probably you'll see cities like Santa Ana. Here it is. Santa Ana has some development. Juan Capistrano, they're showing some development also there in terms of that. And then here they'll just give you more specific data in terms of where construction is happening throughout the county. So this is getting a little bit more detailed. It also just talks about deed restricted type. Are there any deed restricted or affordable developments? Some mapping of that. Then it'll also outline where are some of the developments in the county that are utilizing low-income housing tax credits, some of the funding that creates affordable housing is all in here, right? You'll be able to see where that type of construction is happening and be able to do some more filters using that. So, but the APR that you will see usually is more numerical and then narrative. That's what the APR will look like and give you that information. But what I wanted to just give you a glimpse of was what the cities usually look at and turn into the state. And then I'll give you a quick summary of how we looked at that information. Kennedy Commission. And if we go to our section here that has housing elements, go to your city. And then we compiled all that data that the city submit to the state into a matrix per city. There's different tabs on the bottom. You can locate the city that you are trying to identify. There's also a total chart in terms of production countywide and at what levels. So you can see that there's probably, in most cases, we're meeting 30–40% of very low income housing production in some cities. But the above moderate, it's over the amount of RENA that was subscribed, the RENA being the housing regional needs assessment that was given to a city. And that number in most cases for above moderate has been surpassed 3–4 times the number that was originally allowed. So just a quick example, if we go to a city like Anaheim, we went back to 14 all the way through 21. And here's all the data. So to date, the city of Anaheim has produced 8,700 units in terms of permitting, but only about 270 or 69 are at affordable at low, very low. So very little production at the low, very low. You can see that really quickly there. And if we go also in this same document, be able to see what their new RENA allocation is for the 6th cycle. So for Anaheim, it's 17,000 units, and it's broken down to these income categories. So that's where we have been finding that these documents are really helpful to be able to communicate to the city in letters and also conversations with city staff and electeds that your current policies and programs are not meeting your housing element needs in a balanced way. So in the 6th cycle, we need to do a better job to address these needs. And we have proposals that all of us collaboratively have worked on to be able to include in their new housing elements that, well, most cities have been due for some time. Only 2 cities in Orange County are in compliance, Yorba Linda and Irvine. The rest are working to get into compliance and going through revisions. Let me stop there, see if there are any questions or comments.
We did have a couple of questions in the chat, and let me just, because sometimes not everybody's looking at the chat, and they're really good answers. Elizabeth has been on it answering people's questions. One of the questions was, what is the difference between entitled and permitted? And so, Elizabeth, do you want to just quickly answer that since you answered in the chat so everybody can hear?
Sure. So when anything that you are going to develop, if I'm the developer, if I own a piece of land or I'm looking to buy a piece of land and I want to build something on it, you have to go through this process to basically get permission from the city to build it. And that process is called the entitlement process. And so something that is entitled means that it's gone through that process with the local government to get permission for it to be built. So that's what entitled means. And once you have your entitlements, that is a great achievement, especially in Orange County. But there is usually some gap of time, especially when we're talking about affordable housing, between when a project gets approved, which is the same thing as being entitled, and when you're actually going to put, the bulldozer in there and put sticks in the ground and bricks in, the sticks and bricks part. And with affordable housing, that span of time can actually be years. And the reason is because assembling the financing for affordable housing is, I've heard it described as like, a 7-layer cake that's really 15 layers, or, if you've ever had trifle, it's layer upon layer upon layer. It's very complicated. I would not want to be charged with explaining it to someone, But needless to say, they have to, once they have the entitlements, they have to go compete for tax credits. They have to get matching funds. They might get bond money. That, there's lots of different financing places. And so before you can put a shovel in the ground, you have to assemble all that financing. So that's, it kind of explains the difference. And in California, we don't, not surprising, we don't have enough money to pay for all the affordable housing. And it has gotten to the point where it used to be that tax credits, there's two different types of tax credits. It used to be that the sort of the lower version of the tax credits were not competitive because, if you could get your project entitled, there'd be a tax credit for you. It's now gotten so, we have such a backlog that even that process is competitive. So anyway, I could go on, but I'll just stop there. But yeah, so the difference between entitled and permitted is entitled means they have permission from the local government to build it. Permitted means I've gone down to the city, I've pulled my building permits, I've got my shovel, and I'm ready to build.
Just to clarify, the units that are being accounted for in the annual progress reports have to be permitted. They have permits on those particular developments.
So there's a great question here. What are the roadblocks to getting a property entitled, a project entitled? So what are some of the things that can crop up and derail it?
Do I get to talk first?
Whoever wants to jump in, go for it.
Elizabeth, you can take that one. I'm going to jump onto my phone.
Oh, okay.
I'll join you in a second.
So I personally believe, and when we're talking about entitled here, we're not talking about permitted, right? Permitted requires lots of funding. Local governments don't, they have a role to play in that, but they don't have an exhaustive role, right? NIMBYism. NIMBYism is the biggest barrier to getting things entitled, right? I call it, NIMBYs like to play the game of those people, right? When you're building an affordable project for people experiencing homelessness or low-income families, the NIMBYs come out and they're all, we don't want those people living in our, we don't want them living in our neighborhood, right? And when I've seen it go the other way too, where, when something's going in that's like, swanky, people come out and say the same thing. Well, that's not affordable. You can't build that, which really fails to recognize that, housing exists on a spectrum and that we need to do, Cesar is right. We have, the market will deliver to some degree on market rate housing. The market is not delivering on low income affordable housing. So that is where we have to put extra effort, certainly extra funding. But when we're just talking about just the process of getting something entitled, getting permission to build something, I believe it's NIMBYism and the lack of political will for the local city council to approve that new housing, whatever it looks like, is a reflection of NIMBYism. The only person that is, telling you that they agree with you is doing it, in a text message, under the table, rather than coming to the podium and saying, I support, this affordable housing development. For the decision maker, taking that brave vote is a lot harder if the only people that are in your at your council meeting or the only emails that you've received are saying, how dare you do this? Don't do this. You're going to ruin my neighborhood, blah, 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 blah. So that's why it's so important to know where you live and know where you vote and to be engaged and to show up to support affordable housing, because the decision makers, they need that support in order to make that brave vote.
So Andrea, your question in the chat is kind of following along that, right? With the low numbers, how can more affordable housing be built at the rate that is needed? It won't happen unless the decision makers, city by city, feel supported in both at the planning commission level and at the city council level in voting the right way on these developments when they come forward. And also beyond just voting the right way, we talk about that a lot, but proactive advocacy that we're really building with this collaborative and with all of you, it creates conditions where it's not just on a project by project basis that we're just biting our fingernails hoping the housing gets built, but that people are getting elected and knowing, and that's part of their platform, is providing the housing that that everybody in their community needs at all income levels, right? And that there are policies and programs that that are already in place that expedite that make it actually easier to develop housing in their communities. So, you know, we could go, and with these Housing Policy Made Simple sessions, we do go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. You're going to hear next session about federal funding sources and policies that can either make it better or impede it, right? And so keep coming to these to find out more about what are the specific things we should be advocating for in our cities in order to expedite more affordable housing.
Can I do a quick, I know Cesar did a little quick tour of the website. There was actually something I actually wanted to point out, is that okay if I share my screen?
Yeah, actually, Elizabeth, I was actually going to turn it over to you now, and I'd like to get your thoughts just on the APRs, and you know, and if you want to go back to that or share any other resources, talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
So annual progress reports are important because it is public accountability. And to date, HCD has had a hard time. They collect a lot of data, but they've had a really hard time making that data available for the public. That has gotten better with this website. And so I'm going to share my screen because I want to show you this data portal. So this is the California Department of Housing and Community Development, and they have a whole bunch of data that you can look at. And I know that there is a lot here. The one that Cesar was just talking about was this one, the annual progress reports. So I'm going to click on that. And I kind of wanted to show you, okay, I have to minimize you so that I can see. I have a very small screen, I realize now. Okay, so the way to use this is, if you remember when Cesar showed you, he used these page numbers down here. So I actually prefer to go up here because these headers where it says overview, key figures, construction, housing needs, implementation, user guide, submit feedback, these are actually tied to some of these, right? It's not a one-to-one, but let's say we're going to click on key figures here. All right, I clicked, there we go. So you can actually zoom in. God, they're really slow tonight. I wonder why. I was just using this earlier today. Oh my word.
A lot of advocates are interested.
I guess, man. I guess everybody's on the website. So here we go. So you see where it says county. So I could look up, I can pull down and I can go down. Here's Humboldt County, Imperial County, right? So I'm going to go down. Here's Orange County. So I'm going to click on Orange County. And that's going to bring up over here all of the jurisdictions in Orange County, right? Aliso Viejo, Anaheim. So I live in Fullerton, so I'm going to pick on my own city. All right. And let's say I want to look at the types of housing that, let's say I want to look at accessory dwelling units. Let's try that. Do you guys know what those are? The granny flat or the garage apartment? Okay, so I want to look at how many accessory dwelling units did we permit in 2021? And I know that so here, number permitted, right? So we talked about that, right? The number that are actually completed was 41. So you can go through and you can read, you can look up your own city, you can find, different information. The other options besides, typology is, single family detached, single family attached. And why do they not have multifamily in here? That is really weird. Huh. It must be in another spot. Anyway, so that sort of shows you though how to use it. You got to filter by county, then you got to filter by city, then you filter by year, and you filter by structure. And then tenure just means, is it owner occupied or is it rented? So that's kind of the first start, right? Then if you want to go to construction, you can do the same thing, right? You can decide what area you want to look at. So here again, go to county. My website catches up with me. You can go to county, Orange County. All right, let's just leave it at Orange County for now, because otherwise I'm never going to be able to do anything. So here's the map. Average days by jurisdiction. Minimum of 10 projects. Okay. What is this about? Oh, permitted to completed, right? So here's, okay, so we talked about the amount of time from submitted to entitled, right? Then we talk about entitled to permitted. And then this is permitted to completed. And in order to be considered completed, it has to have what's called a certificate of occupancy, which is basically what you get when you have had all your inspections by the city. And they give you the green light to go ahead and, you know, rent what you, or buy, you know, sell what you built. So here's information about building. Here's information about needs, right? So this goes to, you guys probably remember talking about RENA, right? About looking at each city and how much progress they've made. So this is similar, not exactly the same, but the, yeah, this is similar to what is on the Kennedy Commission website, except here we're looking at it. You can look at it. I know I have to use my glasses because I'm old now. So the print is so tiny, but if you look right here, this says SCAG, right? Southern California Association of Governments. Where did it go? Here we go. So under SCAG, right? SCAG has 6 counties in it. Imperial, which is down next to San Diego, LA, Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura. I know you guys know where those are. So I'm going to click on Orange County, and it's going to open up for me all of, hold on, sorry, my small screen is getting in my way. It's going to open up for me. So for this planning period, which is the 6th cycle, no one has made, you know, no one is very significantly in the way, right? Because we haven't been in it yet long enough. But we can go over here, right? And we can look at, see how there's more progress, right? The bars are longer because this cycle just ended, right? We just ended. So we can look, oh, I got off of SCAG. Excuse me. All right, let me try again. All right, Orange County. So this APR, what he was talking about the annual progress reports, this information is, am I in the 5th cycle? Yeah, 5th cycle. Okay, so here, let's look at Anaheim, right? So he was talking about how Anaheim had made a lot of progress in the above moderate, which then another word for that would be market rate, but they had not made very much progress in the low and very low. And so that is sort of reflected here. I would say if you really want data about Orange County, this is so kind of hard to use. I would actually encourage you to go to the Kennedy Commission website because he has it embedded on his website and it's a lot easier to use. But it's important to know that this data is here, and it's important to know that, you know, if you are interested, this is where you can find it. And believe me, this is much better than it used to be. The other website I wanted to point out to everybody is, you guys have probably been hearing about Housing Elements. So HCD, as part of their new data portal, has this dashboard where you can look at the state of your city's housing element, right? It won't show you the letter that you've got to get directly from them, but you can at least look and see, you know, what's going on with my housing element. So I'm going to look at Fullerton because I know that we have not done much. And so this will show that Fullerton in the 6th cycle, they submitted a draft. The draft was out, it was received, they reviewed it, and we are out of compliance, but it's been out of review. And this review status means that this is the review status according to HCD, right? The draft came in, it was submitted, HCD looked at it, they said, you need to make these changes, or you didn't do enough in this area. And they've sent it back to the city with a letter. That letter, if you are interested in, and we are going to be working on this as a collaborative, holding your city accountable to do what they say they would do. So that would probably be most likely, we're going to rezone some sites. We're going to allow housing to be built in places where we hadn't previously allowed it, right? Making those changes, you know, you write the housing element, you say what you're going to do, but then you actually have to implement it. You actually have to carry it out, right? Or another option, in addition to the rezoning, might be something like, you know, we're going to talk about, you know, an inclusionary housing ordinance, right? Or we're gonna, you know, do the work to figure out what it would take to set up a trust fund or some sort of an account where we could impound fees from developers if they, like Anaheim has one of these. It sort of is like a voluntary inclusionary. It doesn't do as much as like a percentage inclusionary, but it's better than nothing. My city has nothing. So it's all, you know, we're moving in the right direction, but we need to move faster. But anyway, so I just wanted to point out that, like, as we continue to move through this housing element review process and compliance process, you know, this dashboard is also here. I wish that it was more friendly looking. It's not, it is not friendly looking, I don't think, but it is here. And, you know, if you have time and you are interested, I would encourage you to kind of play around with it. If you have relatives in another city and they're as geeky as you could look up their city and compare your cities. So anyway, and I can drop the link to that in the chat as well. But I just wanted to kind of show you have to filter by county and then filter by city. And if you want the area for the unincorporated county, you basically what you end up looking for is, so like here, so let me undo Fullerton. If I go back up here, it should let me pick Orange County. So here, see here where it says Orange, I'm in Orange County, County of Orange, jurisdiction, Orange County. This means all the land that is unincorporated, meaning all the land that is not part of another city. So that's what the data would be for that.
So Elizabeth, so a couple questions from the, and Cesar, a couple questions. I'm gonna just, it's a perfect segue for what you just said. What is the status of the counties, the County of Orange housing element? Cindy asked in the, do we know like where the counties, and again, want to reiterate that what Elizabeth said there, the way to understand Orange County, if you don't know how this works jurisdictionally, you have 34 cities and you have a county government here. The county government, they have a responsibility to produce their own housing elements for the unincorporated areas. So in Orange County, that's places like Midway City. That's not Midway City, ironically, is not a city. It is an unincorporated area of Orange County. And Rossmore would be an unincorporated area of Orange County. And so the County of Orange housing element covers all of those unincorporated areas.
Right. Okay, let me see if I can get this to work.
Yeah, the housing element for the County of Orange, as Tim mentioned, covers the whole region of Orange County where cities do not have a jurisdiction. So county islands and areas of such. A lot of it have been incorporated into different cities, but the county still has responsibility for those areas that are unincorporated. So right now, the County of Orange still has a pending housing element. They have a first draft. They're working on revisions. And I think those are pretty much all the updates on that. I haven't heard anything new from them at this point.
Yeah,
and that's what this, yeah. And so that's what this reflects, right? Here we are, County of Orange, the jurisdiction is unincorporated, everything in Orange County that is unincorporated, 6 cycle planning period. It's a draft. The draft, according to HCD, is out, right? They've come in, it's reviewed and it's pushed out. The day it was received by HCD, the day it was returned by HCD, and the compliance, meaning that HCD does not, that the county's housing element, the current version of it or the current draft of it is not approved, and therefore they are out of compliance. And compliance is basically this, you can actually kind of think of it like an approvals process. You know, you go through these hurdles to get your housing element approved, and then that's called being in compliance. But let's say, you know, 3 years into your 8-year planning period, you know, you had told the state, okay, we are going to make room to accommodate our housing need, right? Our RHNA number, our regional housing need allocation. We're going to make room by upzoning, you know, this major corridor, and where you could only in the past build, you know, I'm just making this up, right? You could only build 2 stories. We're going to say, okay, now it's okay, you can build 4 stories, right? And there's multiple ways to measure that density, but for the sake of argument, that's the effect of what upzoning means. Well, if you happen to do something like that, and if your residents happen to have a panic attack because buildings are tall and they have tall building phobia, and if they come to you at city council and you respond to them by changing your zoning and pushing the height limit back down, then the HCD will come to you and say, you are now out of compliance. You are no longer in compliance. You have fallen out of compliance. And then they will seek to have you remedy that situation, and it will result in a lawsuit. But anyway, I digress. The point is that it is an ongoing monitored process. It is not something that, like, you know, once you've achieved it, it's over, you know. Those APRs are also hopefully going to, you know, play a role in that as well. Right now that there's been a lot of policy change at the state level with the governor's new task force. I think what did they call it? Their strike force. I mean, there's all kinds of fun names associated with housing now that you never would have heard of, even probably 7 years ago. You know, never before was there a housing strike force. But anyway, I digress.
So let me ask you, there's a couple of really good questions, additional questions. One is, and Cesar, Elizabeth, somebody take this. Does the dashboard show permanent supportive housing progress?
As we were
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say the dashboard just identifies production at the different income levels. So permanent supportive housing will fall into the extremely low income category, which is it's not identified there in terms of production. So it's going to be in the very low income category. They just capture the extremely low, very low into that category. But in the narrative of the APRs, they usually talk about what projects they're trying to take credit for to meet their numbers, and they will identify and give a narrative. If it was a project that was a family project, a senior project, or a special needs or permanent supportive housing development.
Yeah, and I will tell you this, the reason I really like that question is we were talking just today, Elizabeth, Cesar, myself, Bex, Michael, our collaborative, when we have a strategic plan for the collaborative, and we have kind of do a series of 120-day operating plans, and we were going over our next 120-day plan. And one of the things that is on that plan is for us to get a better handle on tracking permanent supportive housing, and also identifying sites in the housing elements that would be very suitable for permanent supportive housing. Now, most of those are going to be things like Project Home Key things. That's the motel conversions that the state pays for into permanent supportive housing, those types of things. But we need to see more permanent supportive housing. And if we don't have some focus on that, then we won't get it. And anybody, we can maybe do a deeper dive on permanent supportive housing in another Housing Policy Made Simple. That might be a really good idea to do that. So permanent supportive housing, just for those unfamiliar, is affordable housing with support, wraparound supportive services provided on site for the tenants. So, you know, caseworker, case managers, mental health services, sometimes childcare if it's families and things like that. That's what goes into permanent supportive housing. So what I always say is the way to understand it is all affordable housing is not permanent supportive housing, but all permanent supportive housing is affordable housing. It's just affordable housing with wraparound services, and it's a proven solution to chronic homelessness, which chronic homelessness is defined as someone who's been homeless at least 1 year and has some disabling condition. So that's why that is important. But yeah, I'm glad you asked the question, because no, it is not tracked separately, but we're working on being able to track that more effectively with groups like the Orange County Housing Finance Trust, the county, and then our collaborative. So let me,
Can I
you have something to add there, Elizabeth?
I do. And I realize I gave people a bit of wrong information. So when I was looking at those, when I was on this part of the dashboard, I thought I was looking, this is not progress. This is need. So I apologize. If you want to see like progress toward the RENA and you want to see a visualization of it. So this shows you the need, right? So like for SACOG, right? This is saying that like 25% of their RENA allocation, 25% of their need in the sixth cycle is the very low, right? And the blue would be the low and the orange and then the above moderate. I realized that I was looking at this as though that was progress, but that's not right. It's under permits because obviously regional housing need. Here's progress, permits, having pulled the permits. So I'm going to just quickly just show here, because I think this visualization is better than anything I've seen on this dashboard. I played with this a little bit this afternoon, but let's try it. Okay. So the reason that now, if you look, so here's Santa Ana, Irvine, San Clemente. So these green is showing you the total RENA, right? The total RENA allocation for that city. It's over 20,000 in Irvine. Why do we have no progress? Because this is for the 6th cycle right here, right? We just started the 6th cycle. So nobody's had time. Well, Santa Ana, the overachiever. Santa Ana has made progress, but the 5th cycle, if we flip it over, so here we are in this is annoying about this thing, is that you have to go back and reselect so here we have similar, right? So in Irvine, in the 5th cycle, which just ended, here you have Irvine's, the RENA number is in green. What they actually built is in blue. So for everyone who was freaking out about the level of, the high number of RENA, the high RENA number in Irvine, what they don't tell you is that Irvine did just fine, right? Last cycle. So not that they necessarily will again, but and here in Anaheim, right? What Cesar was saying was, here was the city's RENA, right? The green. Here was what they achieved, but it's not breaking it out by type of housing. And so I should have found that data before this. If we were to go and do the research to find that data here, what you would see and what you'll see on Cesar's website is, because Anaheim does not have an inclusionary policy, there was a lot of density allowed in the Platinum Triangle. And so they've built a lot of housing, but it didn't necessarily bring affordability with it, because there was no, even baseline, just I'm a believer that what we really need to do is everybody just needs to have a baseline to just get us started. And you have some cities like Irvine that has like 15%, some cities have, 5%, 10%. But the problem in Orange County is that the rules are different in all the different cities, but I digress. But anyway, so this is a good part of the picture. It's not the whole picture, but I wanted to just make sure that I made that point, because I didn't want to leave folks with the wrong impression.
So here's another question from Pat. When cities excel in above moderate, does that carry over and reduce need to do more affordable housing? She says it makes me steam when a city person says we met our overall numbers, avoiding not having met the affordable numbers.
No, I mean, you don't get extra. I mean, it's great to be an overachiever, but you don't get extra credit. And one of the challenges, and this goes to zoning, and this is where you start to talk about programs and how programs intersect with just, you have a number, but where you start to have an intersection and a crossover is, I mean, this came up also in Anaheim, where, you only have, and especially in Orange County, where cities are, we don't have a lot of greenfield land, right? Or sometimes called virgin land. We don't have a lot of land that nothing was ever built on, right? A lot of times we're recycling these sites. So, and we don't have a ton of them, right? Things have to go out of business before the site becomes available for reuse. And so when you have a limited number of sites, and when those sites are zoned high density or higher density, which means that they are suitable for affordable housing, if there's no mechanism to make sure that an affordable housing project kind of gets a bite at the apple, a bite at the site, it used to be that you could just sort of gobble up that site for a higher density project, but there was no adjustment of the existing zoning to accommodate for the fact that we just lost a really, we had a prime site for affordable housing. The project's getting developed, but it's not affordable. So now we have in the new world, in the new 6th cycle era of the world, we have this thing called no net loss, which means that if something like that happens, where we have a site that is suited for affordable housing, zoned in such a way that affordable is possible, and the city is counting that site in their capacity for this RENA number that they're going to accommodate, if that site, we say if it goes market rate, right, they have to adjust the other sites, the other parcels that are in the list of available sites, has to get, it's going to shift the calculus, right? So that's really important. That wasn't in place before. And I think it contributed a lot to why we saw, at least in Anaheim, a very high number of market rate units, because there was already density allowed by the zoning, but we didn't see a lot of progress in affordable because some of those sites got used for regular market rate housing and not for affordable housing. And I just want to be clear, like, I'm not vilifying market rate housing. Most people live in market rate housing. So we need to continue to build all types of housing. But because affordable housing requires a higher density in order to build it, just by the funding mechanism, we have to make sure that we give extra accommodation and extra, bites of the apple so that we cannot just use up all of our appropriate sites and, then say, oh, well, we tried, sorry about that. We'll have to wait another 8 years, right? That is not what we're going for.
So there was a quick question, and Cesar, are you still on or did we lose you? We might have lost Cesar because I don't see him on here and I haven't heard him. So yeah, I think we lost him.
He's here.
Oh, there you are.
No, I'm here.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Can you quickly define an overlay? We've said that a couple
Yes.
times. What is an overlay, and make it as simple as possible for folks?
Great. So we start off with what's the regular zoning in your city. There's different zoning. There's commercial, industrial, residential, multifamily, single family, and within that residential component. And so that's your base zoning in the city. So an overlay means that we're going to use an additional layer over certain parcels or certain zoning or certain part of the city to allow an additional use. So we're overlaying a different use onto that existing use. That permits the existing use to remain, right? But then we will be able to build an additional use after that. So one quick example on that is if we have commercial industrial zones, which most of Orange County, that's where new development's going. They're going to be converting commercial industrial areas into residential. And in most cases, the cities are not changing the zoning. They're allowing the businesses, commercial industrial, to continue. And someone can go in and continue that use or propose a new use that's commercial industrial. But if they want to use that land for residential, there has to be an additional use on there, which is an overlay, or they can ask for a rezoning. But the overlay is a more practical opportunity for people to continue to use the property in its current use and then transition to a different use.
Thank you. So let me, before I go into some more questions, I'm going to get to all these questions. We have time. I want to ask a question that I brought into this because some people have been asking. I've heard it asked, multiple places. This annual report, the annual progress report process. Can you reiterate the schedule for those? Like, what is the timing? What part of the year do those typically, do cities gear up to have to prepare those so that advocates can be prepared to have public input? And is public input required?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes. So the time frame for the deadline is they have to submit by October of the following year. Right, so for 2021, we are getting those submitted now, this year in April. There may be some that are stragglers, right? But the cities start working on this. They should be working on it year round, because ultimately what's going to happen is they have to compile this document. So most cities just keep working on this, and whenever there's a project coming forth, they approve it, they put it on that list. They do have to take it to the city council, and in some cases they take it to the planning commission for approvals. so you may see these documents as early as February, January, February, or March, because they want to go through that process and then put them up to the state by the deadline. And that's the opportunity for us to collectively comment on their progress. You know, we're not going to be able to do anything about the past progress because it's reporting a year later, but what we will be able to see, like you saw in our charts, is we're tracking from 2014 to the present for the 5th cycle, and we'll do the same for the 6th cycle, to be able to spot those issues early on so that we can approach the city and let them know that we're concerned about the lack of progress on the production or the lack of progress on policies, because this time around in this element, we all have been working to get policies programs into them that are going to be effective, and we're going to be asking for implementation. And that's going to be the basis of our work coming forth, is like, you committed to doing certain things and we're holding you accountable for that. And we want to be a partner with you, or we want to also be able to point out that you're not making significant progress and you should be doing more.
And is public input required as part of the APR process?
It's not it's not even required that I think there is a requirement that your council approve it. So HCD was trying to make it so that there be a public participation period, basically a public hearing, but there isn't a requirement that they notify everybody. So we have to be vigilant in doing that. So I think the best approach, like for us, is to be in contact with city staff and say, hey, where are you on your APR? When should we expect that? And when is it going to go to council? So we started outreaching in January, February, and then making sure that we have that on our schedule so that we can be proactive.
Yeah. So speaking of that, so what we're trying to do as a collaborative is trying to help you as advocates locally in your cities be prepared for these things. So one of the reasons we're doing these types of things, like getting folks educated on this process, is we want to be able to, start shuttling information to you, and letting you know when processes are starting, when is the time to start, getting information and getting yourself organized to have input, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to do our best to help you all kind of figure out that calendar. And then let me shift to another question that I'm going to carry over from the last Advocacy 101 that we did. And I get it a lot there. And I don't like to use Advocacy 101 to kind of go down this rabbit hole, but this seems like a good place to do it. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the enforcement mechanism that the state has, right? What are the penalties for, can both of you take a crack at simplifying for folks, like what are the penalties for, first start with non-compliance, like the penalties that some of the cities have already incurred for submitting non-compliant housing elements. And then as the process goes through of implementation, what are the recourses and penalties that the state has to hold the cities accountable?
Sure, and I think by and large, housing element has been an area where the community has to hold the cities accountable, and that's something that you may all have heard different legislative and also legal actions that the county commission has taken to enforce commitments in the housing element, such as Huntington Beach, Mission Viejo, Garden Grove, a variety of cities where we have been really engaged to do that. So the main issue before the state had authority to actually move forward with enforcement, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier, there's a strike force now, there's the Attorney General and HCD kind of teaming up to make sure that there's enforcement of these housing element requirements and commitments. So that's something fairly new that's just coming into the fold as of the last couple of years, some recent legislation. And we saw that earlier in Huntington Beach in the case that we were involved with, where the Attorney General and the state also came in on that. And then you've seen many cities being called out by HCD and being told that they may be found to be in violation of certain issues. But to answer the question in terms of what is required and what are the penalties, the requirement is that the cities have a compliant housing element within a certain period of time, and that period of time was October 2021. Most cities at this point have not been in compliance. Only 2 cities are in compliance. So what happens to every other city that's not in compliance? Well, they're open to lawsuits at this point. Citizens organizations can sue because they don't have a compliant housing element. A developer could move forth and ask for by right development because they don't have a compliant housing element at this point. So those are some of the issues that could happen on there. There's also more extreme scenarios that if the cities are not in compliance, the state could take away their planning authority and request that they have no local control of their planning and approval of permits, whether it's commercial, residential, industrial, you name it. So that's something that's.
We had on and People for Housing in YIMBY, yes, in my backyard, which we are a part of and will continue to work with. They put together a list. So it's this where I said you can download the list of consequences here. There's a PDF that'll take you to the PDF. You don't have to download it, but it'll let you see it. So sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know if you didn't write it all down,
No
there
problem.
is a summary in the chat.
Yeah, and I think just a larger consequence now with the state having authority to enforce is that the state could also refer these non-compliant cases to the Attorney General, and there could be litigation from the state to get you back into compliance. And I would also just say that, that after the elements are approved, as Tim mentioned a minute ago, there's also this presumption that you should move forward with good faith efforts to keep your commitment. So if you don't, and you're able to point out to commitments that are not being met, then there may be litigation on those. There may be also HCD finding you out of compliance, saying you were in compliance, but you're not meeting your requirements. So we're going to find you out of compliance. And that gets you back into this spot where we mentioned ago, where it opens you up to litigation and the ability not to approve projects.
So there's an organization called Californians for Home Ownership who has been, I know the attorney, they have been actually suing cities for being in non-compliance. And this link, the CA for Homes housing elements, talks about some of those lawsuits. But so yes, there are definitely advocacy organizations out there that are using the judicial system to get compliance.
So let me add a little 2 cents on this. I know some of the folks who are at the Advocacy 101 heard me say this. One of the reasons I don't like going down this rabbit hole at Advocacy 101 is I want us to get to a place where proactive advocacy is precluding the need for any lawsuits or any enacting of these things. And what I fear happening sometimes is that we fixate on some of these compliance measures. And to be honest, even with the lawsuits that are happening and have happened, I'm not hanging my hat on that as a solution to my city doing what it needs to do to produce housing. I'm just not. The likelihood of the state lowering the hammer on Irvine or Fullerton is really, really, really low. What I think will work better and what I want to focus on is I want to focus on vote number 3. I want to focus on knowing that I've got 3 out of my 5 city council members, 3 out of my 5 planning commissioners who will vote the right way, cast their courageous votes, right? Mm-hmm. Before I ever get to having to use the stick, I'm not even talking about using the carrot. I don't want to use a carrot and stick at all. What I want to do is I want to exert enough positive pressure in the form of community support. Exactly. To where it is undeniable that city council members need to vote a certain way because that is the will of the community. And if they don't do that, they're going to get voted out. So that's why we need to start building and building. I don't believe our solution is enacting any of these things. I'm glad that the state is starting to get it buttoned up a little bit more. I think I said at the Advocacy 101 last time, I'd love to see them start really tying it to things that will mean something to cities. Like, you're going to lose your transportation funds, or you're going to, like, there are other things that they could tie it to that might have a little more teeth. But in the meantime, I'm not relying on that at all, because the minute you trigger legal action, you're in a years long type of battle, because they're going to battle back, and then the housing's not going to get produced. So if we got to go there, we got to go there. But if you've been to Advocacy 101, you know that I draw a distinction between advocacy and activism. And they're both necessary at some times, but we haven't done enough advocacy in this county. And we have folks that will engage in activism, sometimes even lawsuits, but we need more of that advocacy. So that's my 2 cents on it. Let me jump and go back to another question here. Does an overlay require a zoning ordinance amendment?
Yes. So a zoning ordinance, an ordinance literally just means a piece of legislation enacted at the local level, the local government level. So an ordinance is it's a local law. So anything that changes that is a legislative action. So yes, it does require a vote.
And then I've got a question here. Are you hearing anything about HCD easing up on the housing element approval process, given the very low rate of housing element acceptance? Are you hearing about any movements for them to, weaken the deadlines or provide extensions or anything like that?
Well, as of a meeting I was in today, Bloom had a bill that would have done something, some type of extension. I'm not 100% sure. That bill has died. Now, it may be resurrected, but as of today, my understanding is there were 2 bills, I think, that were being looked at as a potential extension. And to my knowledge, from what I heard in the meeting I was in today, this morning, neither of those have moved forward, and the window is closing on legislation. So that's what I know. I don't know. Cesar may know different.
Cesar, any other thoughts on that?
No, that's correct. I think there's still some efforts to try and get relief, whether it's an extension or whether it's non-application of the statutes. But I think, as Elizabeth mentioned, the legislator is also contemplating what's going to happen in the next arena for the next counties, like up in the Bay Area. So that window is closing, and it becomes a bit more complicated to do it now.
Okay.
I'll just say really quickly.
Yeah.
Having been in lots of conversations with HCD has a whole bunch of new powers, quote unquote, of enforcement, but HCD isn't even sure what, they have the power, but they have not even worked really out for themselves.
Correct.
how they're going to enact it. Right. And I mean, you do this long enough and you start to make friends with people. HCD, they're not ogres, they're human beings just like us. And they're trying to figure out, what is the appetite for enforcement, and they always lead with, we always want to work with you, city. We always want to try to make sure that you fully understand what is being asked of you before you hold up your hand and say, talk to the hand because the face ain't listening. So I don't think it's going to be as draconian as I know. I mean, I know cities are nervous. I know council members are nervous, and city planning folks are nervous. But I have faith in the process.
So, hey, Rona, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to take yourself off mute and ask your question that you thought was too lengthy to put into the chat. So go ahead.
Yeah, and if you want to put me last, this may be too wonky.
Go for it. And if we think it's, we'll try to be concise because we got about 19 minutes left.
Okay. So my question, an easy question is, would progress towards an overlay be on the dashboard? That's the easy question.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? So would an overlay be on the dashboard? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, would progress on a housing overlay, like if that's a housing overlay is a particular program in the housing element, would that be dashboard?
I don't think that the dashboard is that detailed. I would have to go back and look. but you would find that in the narrative of the latest annual progress report. And so you'll see a bunch of charts first, and then you'll see a narrative, and the narrative will explain their progress on the programs.
Okay, so that was the easy question. The harder question, or the more complex question is, if the city wants to put an overlay in their housing element, do they have to list the sites at 30 units to the acre to be counted as low income if the housing overlay that applies to that site involves a density bonus that, if they meet their affordability requirements, would put them over the 30 units anyway? So in other
Right.
words,
Yeah,
could they put it at a base density of like 20 units to the acre, and then if it's enacted, if they meet the requirements of affordability,
Yeah.
they could go, it would go over 30, but how would they count that on their housing inventory?
Yeah, for the housing, especially for low, very low, they have to identify the base density at least at 30 units to the acre.
Yeah.
Independent of density bonus and then the other incentives. So the base has to be 30, and then they can go from there.
Right.
Okay, even if there's an overlay. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
but what affordable housing developers are counting on is, think about this, right? We have a limited amount of land. We need to build as many affordable units, homes as we can. So they, it's funny, an affordable housing developer building an affordable housing project can also use the density bonus. And so a lot of cities are doing what you're, kind of asking about, which is, they know that the site is going to be higher than 30 units to the acre, because there's a really high probability that the affordable housing developer, if it is a 100% affordable project, is going to use the density bonus to get some more affordable units, homes on that plot of land. So a lot of cities are zoning it at 30, full well knowing that it's going to end up a little, somewhat higher based on whatever level of affordability they're building. 30 units to the acre is actually not that dense. Like, there's townhome projects that are 30 units to the acre. So it's, we're in there as having the suburban version, right? Or maybe it's even the urban version. But, there's places where they're doing 60 dwelling units to the acre, 90 dwelling units to the acre. 30 dwelling units to the acre is basically townhomes, right? We're not talking about, towers in the sky here, folks. The Irvine business, if you go by the IBC, all that new housing that's going in there, that's way higher than 30 units to the acre.
Right.
So it's hard to visualize it. And even, you can have two sites that are both zoned, the same density per acre, dwelling unit per acre. But depending on how the site's been laid out, if they have like a whole bunch of open space, then maybe the building will be real tall and skinny. But if all the open space is private open space, if it's all backyards, well, they'll have the same number of units, but the whole parcel will be covered in homes and backyards. So it's, the same plot of land with the same number of units, depending on how you lay it out, could look radically different.
So I'm gonna jump to a question here that Laura asked. What would more advocacy look like? Volunteers or some kind of nonprofit org, or sorry, but it seems like a challenge to grow the advocacy. How do you make people care? Well, let me just tell you that you're with a bunch of people who care, and we know, because we have data that shows that there are more people who care than not. And the National Income Housing Coalition, Cal State Fullerton have both done studies on public opinions related to affordable housing. And they have found that in massive numbers, 65, 70, upwards of 70% of our neighbors will vote for candidates more readily if they have a detailed affordable housing plan, want to see more housing production for people who need services, so permanent supportive housing, things like that. Our job as advocates is not just to learn this stuff, it's to go out and get other people to come. And that's why I say invite people to Advocacy 101, bring people to things like this, to send an Advocacy 101 first so they're not completely overwhelmed. This gets pretty wonky sometimes, but we design it this way, and we design it so that we can have a dialogue with you. I learn something every single time I come and do these things, whether I'm presenting or just moderating. But so Laura, my answer to you is we grow the advocacy by finding other like-minded people and talking to them about it and inviting them to join us. That's the only thing that's going to work. And so encourage you to do that. And then let's see, I see here, are builders like Jamboree looking for good sites and talking to owners? In other words, can we trust them to do that work? Or if there was a location that seemed to be languishing and fit a buy right process, do eager advocates ever actually find a site, talk to an owner, and start the ball rolling on infill that would fit SB 35? So talk about that a little bit on, that's a really good question, a very interesting question. Does all this stuff have to come from somebody like a Jamboree, or the city identifies the site, or an owner wants to sell the site, and how does that happen?
You want me to take it?
So SB 35 and some of the other by right provisions essentially allow local governments to give by right development, by right meaning non-discretionary development on certain projects if they haven't met certain requirements on production, or they don't have sites adequate that are going to be available for development. Developers can use those rights to ask for non-discretionary approvals of these projects. The challenge with affordable housing developers is that oftentimes and most of the time, if not all the time, they depend also on the partnership with the city for affordable housing or for the land. There's a component of a partnership that makes it a bit challenging to then force the city to do by right development, at least publicly, right? I think in negotiations privately, those issues are brought up. I've been involved in some discussions with some developers in some cities where these issues are brought up, that they have the right to do by right development and move forward with this, and the council has no reason to disapprove a project, even though there is NIMBYism. But again, I just want to reiterate that the challenge is that in many cases the cities don't want, the cities and the developer, or the developer in most cases, does not want to damage their relationship with the city or hinder their ability to also get affordable housing funding for that project from the city, right?
Yeah. So we have about 10, we have about 10 minutes left, and we're going to try and get to everybody's questions that we can. And one that just came in, follow up to a comment I made: how do we support our arguments to build affordability? You know, the messaging, the data, surveys, that kind of thing. We have them. So a couple of things that I think are really important if you're not familiar with these, and maybe Michael or Elizabeth, I know you have some of these handy. You can maybe stick a link to some of these in the chat. One that was recently done was the UC Irvine, the Livable Cities Lab at UCI just released a groundbreaking report on the effect of affordable housing on property values and crime in a neighborhood. So you hear that all the time, right? As an argument against, oh, don't put that housing here, it'll bring crime, and it will lower my property values. They proved conclusively in this that actually the opposite effect is true. That it actually raises property values by as much as 9%. Property values can go up, and their analysis, they have all their good methodology in there. It's a very well done study. And then they also found that in nearly every case, crime goes down. They found one area where crime slightly goes up, but then when they explained how much it went up, it was almost like flat. It just stayed basically the same. So it does not increase. And this joins a body of evidence that we have from across the country. There have been other studies that show the same thing consistently over and over again. There's also the information from the homeless cost study that was done by United Way and the UCI School of Social Ecology a few years ago. So we have data, and also coming to these, and remember, I always say our job is not to change the mind of the NIMBYs. the not in my backyard people, that we're not going to change our mind. I've been doing this a long, long time. I've never changed one NIMBY's mind, not one. I can't count one single success, one notch on my holster of having changed the mind of a hardcore NIMBY, right? What we want to do is we want to identify and educate and activate the undecideds, right? The people in our churches, in our temples, the people in our PTAs and in our social groups and in our families and our neighbors. We want to find those people and bring them to the cause. And they're out there. I mentioned that earlier, that they're out there. We have all that. So keep coming to these things to learn how to talk about this stuff more effectively and message it. Oh, and the other study I wanted to, Elizabeth, I think you may have this at your fingertips to put in there, is the Zuckerberg initiative study on messaging. Yeah, it's a really, really good piece of work on, they tested out messaging around advocacy and homelessness and housing. And they came up with their recommendations on what messages really work to actually educate people, connect with people, change people's minds. So again, those are all available for you to peruse, but keep coming and getting engaged here and you'll start learning better how to talk about it as well.
Yeah, hang on for that, because that actually is, they have a whole toolkit about it. It's called the California Dream Toolkit, and they did a bunch of messaging, and here's the California Dream Toolkit from CZI. CZI is Chan Zuckerberg. It's the wife and husband. It's the guy that founded Facebook and his wife. Actually, it's really a cool study, and there's a summary of it somewhere that I should find, but yeah, it's a really cool study. They basically, in the one that I'll find, I don't know if there's a list, maybe I can give it to Michael and Michael can send it as a follow-up. They did these profiles of different types of thinkers, and or I mean, I guess you could say different, sort of, voter profiles, I guess. And, they had the rugged individualist on one side, and then on the other end of the spectrum, they had the sort of, I can't remember exactly what they called it, but let's call it the kumbaya voter, right? That we should do everything, And so they did all this message testing about what would make the most progress with the least amount of backlash. And the message that they landed on was the idea of not rugged individualism, but so I guess this is redundant, the idea of self-determination. And it's the idea that people should have the resources they need to make the choices they want to make in life. And that message, which didn't focus on who's deserving and who's non-deserving, but really focused on people being able to make the choices about where they live, what kind of career they pursue, all those life choices that we all at some point made in life, or we wouldn't be where we are today. That having the resources to have the freedom to make those choices, that was really kind of what resonated. And if you think about it, it actually kind of makes sense. I mean, I am not a rugged individualist. We probably all fall somewhere on that spectrum, but it was a message that really could resonate with everybody. So I will close my mouth and go try to find this link, but I know we're going to save this chat, so I'm 90% sure that we can send out an e-blast with all the links.
So
Sorry,
let me
Michael.
also, Rona was asking, will all these links be shared? Michael, is it possible we can compile these links and send them around to the folks who attended today?
Yeah, I have a record of the chat, and everyone who's registered, we have a note that you registered. That's how you got the Zoom link. And so in our follow-up, we'll make sure that we include those as well.
Awesome, great.
And will this recording be available?
This recording is for our internal purpose. We will be sending out the resources that we discussed tonight, but not this video specifically.
Great. So we're coming to the end of our time. And I want to just take another opportunity. First and foremost, let me just take the opportunity. I get to work with Elizabeth and Cesar and Michael every day. And we wouldn't be anywhere in this county. I mean, these folks have been doing this for a really long time, and just appreciate them sharing their wisdom and insights on this stuff with us tonight. So thank you both for being here, and thank you for the continued partnership on this. Really appreciate it. And then also want to encourage you again, I say this a lot because I hope people, if I say it enough, I hope people will take it to heart and really do it. Sign up for the newsletters. I get the Kennedy Commission newsletter, right? And that keeps me plugged in. Like, I then know all the stuff they're putting on. I know the stuff Cesar's really concerned about. I know the stuff that's coming down the pipe. The people for Housing OC, just get on their mailing, their email list. I set aside a little bit of time every Saturday to just kind of peruse them. That, you know, I also am on the Up for Growth mailing list. I'm also on Housing California, the National Income Housing Coalition, the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Just get on those things, kind of get yourself in a pattern of setting aside some time to read those. And you'll start, this stuff will start really winding its way into your brain. And before you know it, you'll be talking like a real urbanist, right? And so encourage you to do that. And then lastly, encourage you really to come to July 12th and the federal. We're going to imagine having this kind of dialogue with an expert like Diane Yentel. So we're going to be able to kind of do the same thing with her on federal housing policy. So you'll learn a lot about that. Before we go, Elizabeth and Cesar, Elizabeth, let's start with you. Anything coming up for People for Housing that you want to promote?
Actually, no, because I'm going to visit my family. So I will be out of town for next week. We're all going to the conference, the leadership, the Chila Equity and OC Leadership Conference is next week. And then I'm having a happy 4th of July with my family back east. And I wish you all a happy 4th of July. Something to put on your radar is we are going to be doing, I don't quite know how we haven't figured out a date, but we think it's going to be in September. So it's a little bit in the distance, but we are going to be doing some education or activities around the main policies that have come out of the housing elements. So as we were saying, you know, cities not only do rezoning, but they also do, you know, different policies to help encourage affordable housing production. And so there's going to be, they're not that many, so there's going to be some common themes across all the cities. So we're going to be doing some education and activities around that. More to come, but just keep that, you know, hopefully when you see it, you'll be like, oh, that's what she was talking about.
Cesar, anything coming up for Kennedy Commission?
Not in July, but in August and September, we do have some workshops coming up, along with also the it's a program that we put annually together. It's called the Lenders and Investors Forum for Orange County, and I can provide that information to all of you through our newsletter when that is coming up.
Awesome.
Can I drop a link for the event we just did? Is that allowed retroactively?
Sure.
So we did one of the policies that a lot of cities are looking at doing is affordable housing on church-owned land. And so we did a series on it. And if you go to our website, which is peopleforhousing.org, if you look up in the corner, there's something that says YIMBY. Yes, and it's supposed to stand for Yes in God's Backyard. But this is a work in progress. I'm not done yet. But we did 2 webinars, which are on this website. They're on YouTube that you can watch. 2 different case studies on doing affordable housing on church-owned property. The second one is up and built in what is Wesley Village in Garden Grove. And we're going to add to this site. It's a work in progress, but it's an idea that several cities, at least in North Orange County, have cited, including Yorba Linda. And so I would just offer that up as something that we have done in the very recent past that I hope you'll learn from.
Okay, great. So we're at time. Thank you all for attending. Please keep showing up. Please keep doing what you're doing. Thank you for all you're doing in your cities, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.